Dr. Wesley Hill. It is such a delight to have you on For Real. Thanks for making the time to talk with me today.
Well, I'm thrilled. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
We've already been chatting it up before the mics were on, so I predict that this is going to be a very fun conversation. You mentioned I could call you Wes. I'll try really hard, but if you go to the trouble of getting a doctorate, I probably won't call you Wes. I'll probably do Dr. Hill. Yeah. And if I ever get my doctorate, I hope I tattoo it on my forehead. So you're already being much more modest than I would. Okay, here's my very first question for you. I want you to talk to me about Wes Hill in high school. And the reason I want you to talk about this is because now you are a revered New Testament scholar. Again, you have your doctorate in this discipline, you teach at a seminary, but you weren't always that. And so I want to know, how does that happen? Tell me about you, younger you, and how you got to this.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. And thanks again for having me on the podcast. I was a very nerdy high school kid.
Okay, me too.
I did enjoy a lot of outdoorsy things, but I was pretty bookish, and I had a lot of questions about the Bible. I was raised in a Christian family, and like every other family, it was not perfect, but I was loved, and I was led to Jesus by my parents and my church community, and I had a youth pastor he was a fascinating person. He was single at the time, very athletic, very adventurous, but also someone who incredibly disciplined. And one of his main spiritual disciplines is he would memorize large chunks of the Bible.
Interesting.
I mean, like multiple chapters. So like the Sermon on the Mount, or, the book of James and things like this. And so he was
the youth pastor.
I know.
Stirring things up. That's awesome.
Exactly. So I kind of came under his wing, and I had a lot of questions about the Bible myself. And so we would go out to lunch at this barbecue restaurant. I grew up in the South, and I would pepper him with questions. And I look back on that time, and I think that's really where the seeds of what I'm doing today were kind of first planted. And that curiosity about the Bible was nurtured in me. Okay. So I was reading, I found my way to books by people like Philip Yancey and Henry Nouwen. Some of your listeners probably know. So these were very nourishing, and I think I just kind of went from one thing to the next, and that's where it started.
That's so fantastic. Have you mentioned to this man what a profound impact he had on you? I'm sure you have.
I have. And he's now married and has several children, and is still doing his thing, which is great.
So, that's wonderful. I had a wonderful, just ridiculously kind youth group leader as well, whom I have thanked many, many times since for all the hours, hours and hours that she poured into my life. And when I got to be that age, she was about 23 when we started hanging out. Okay. And I remember reaching 23 and thinking, how did Tracy spend all of this time with me? The commitment she had just hanging out and showing me what it looked like to be a person who loved Jesus, even when she got her car washed. It wasn't like we were talking about esoteric things all the time. But she wasn't my mom, and she wasn't my dad. And so I got to see a little different version. What an extraordinary thing.
It's such an important role in the church. And I feel like sometimes we don't do enough to celebrate youth pastors.
Yes.
And they don't get a lot of the limelight. And like you say, it's kind of a thankless job.
Totally. And so many hours.
But it can be so, so formative, as it was for me.
Totally. And to your point, I've also heard really hard stories about youth group leaders who weren't necessarily careful with those years of asking big questions. So to have someone say to you, oh, you have fantastic questions, I'm not going to shut them down or make you feel like God's not big enough for that question. That's a sacred gift that he gave to you. So that's awesome. Okay, now I can picture you in high school. We can continue. Dr. Hill, you have a brand new book that I devoured, and it's called Easter. It's part of this of an InterVarsity Press series called the Fullness of Times series. These slim volumes to kind of help modern readers embrace again the church calendar and what goes with the big moments in the church calendar. And so super excited to talk to you about Easter right before Easter, and about your book. But I wonder, as you look back on high school, Wes, and beyond. How has Easter itself taken on more color for you through
Mm,
the years?
that's a great question. And I've not been asked that question before, so this is
Oh,
fun.
well, happy day.
I think when I think back to my childhood, Easter, I remember my siblings and I would wake up in the morning, and our mom had put out Easter baskets with Easter treats
Sure.
that were in them. We did the whole dyeing eggs and hiding them, and so it was a very festive time. We were very traditional. We always got a new Easter outfit that
Same.
we wore to church,
Yep.
and
Starched. It was always a little
yeah,
starched,
yeah,
hadn't been broken
exactly.
in yet.
Exactly. I remember my sister got, white leather shoes and things like this. And
I think I had a hat a couple of years.
absolutely, absolutely. And then as I got older, the church that we were going to, they did a lakeside sunrise Easter
Oh,
service.
lovely.
And that was very, powerful and memorable. Um, but I think as I've grown as a Christian, so much of my faith and spirituality has just become about the person of Jesus. Like
Mm,
moving away, not necessarily moving away from theology or ideas, but really focused on this person, his
yeah.
life, his teaching, his death, and the fact that he's not dead anymore.
Hmm.
And so I have come to kind of appreciate that every year the church gives us this opportunity to slow down once again and relive, that final week of
Right.
Jesus' life with Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday. We can talk about that. Good Friday, and then Easter Sunday. And
Mhm.
it's a way of inhabiting the story that reminds you again, this is what it's all about. This is
Yeah.
the fundamental thing. It's not about a particular set of convictions or even necessarily a particular agenda for what
Hmm.
you are supposed to do in the world. It's just about knowing this person,
Yeah.
uh, spending time with him, keeping company with him, as I like to sometimes say.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think so. One of my own spiritual practices every year is I will try to read a book slowly during the Lenten season and into the Easter season on the life of Jesus, and just kind
Okay.
of keep company with him. And
I love that practice.
so yeah, yeah.
So, what are you up to this year? May I ask? What's the title of
Yeah,
this
yeah. So
slow
I'm
read?
I'm actually so the previous Pope Benedict XVI, he wrote
Uh-huh.
three little volumes. One is on the
Oh,
birth of
yeah.
Jesus, one is on the period from Jesus' baptism to his transfiguration, and then the final volume is on the last week of his life from Palm Sunday
Oh,
to
how fascinating.
Sunday. And so I'm just reading that third volume again this year, and
Okay.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that idea. I'm also slow reading a book this year for the first time
great, great,
during the Lenten season. It's by Sarah Clarkson. I don't know if you're familiar
okay,
with her. I just think the world of her.
great,
It's not an Easter book, but she's
okay,
helping us go through it bit
excellent.
by bit. And I think it's called This Beautiful Truth. And I'm noticing how it's just a beautiful, beautiful book on its own.
Hmm,
But during this season, to be looking for how the Easter story intersects with days before Easter
yeah,
is changing the way I'm looking
that's
at the
beautiful.
whole couple of months.
That's great.
In
That's
fact,
great.
I'd like to talk to you before we move kind of more specifically into the Easter story. I just have a big picture question for you.
Sure.
When I was in probably high school or college, one of my friends who was equally nerdy and equally reedy, not a word, posed
I
to
like
me.
that
He
word
was
though.
not a person of of the Christian faith, and he posed to me, "Why does it matter if the resurrection happened? Why is
Hmm,
it even important? Can't we just?"
yeah,
He came from a very, very different faith construct where really the idea was just to find the goodness or find the example in a
right,
prophet or
right.
someone who was living a particular moral code and just glean what you could from
Yeah,
that person. And I remember him saying, maybe Jesus was just a really great guy. And that's
right.
what we can take from this. Why does it matter to you
Yes.
if Jesus actually is alive or that he which sounds, I could tell he was trying not to poke fun of how
Sure.
preposterous this is. And
Right. Sounds
it is
like a fairy tale. Yeah,
preposterous.
exactly. Exactly.
We know it's crazy.
Dead people don't come back to life. That's right.
We're aware. We are
That's right.
definitely aware. So I would love for you to respond to that question because
Great question.
you have written about that kind of the postmodern
Yeah.
um, gentle view of
Yeah,
the resurrection is that it doesn't matter, that
right,
maybe it's just a
right.
really great light will come, morning
Exactly.
follows the night, kind of a more poetic.
Exactly.
Um, but if you are an Orthodox Christian, you believe
Yeah,
absolutely it
that's
wasn't
right.
just a metaphor.
Right.
This is a man, as you said. This is the person of Jesus who's alive. So why
That's
does it
right.
matter?
That's a wonderful question. You're asking questions that no one has asked me in these
Oh, I'm
interviews.
so
This is
tickled.
really it's fun. Yeah. It's interesting as you were speaking, Kim. I just read a book called Believe by Ross Douthat. Ross is a
Okay.
columnist for the New York Times, and
Okay.
Zondervan has just published this book. It's brand new. It's called Believe, and I think the subtitle is Why Everyone Should Be Religious.
Oh,
Something like that. And
fascinating.
yeah, it's a very interesting book. But he describes this moment where he was at this cocktail party, and the famous atheist writer Christopher Hitchens came up to him and said, "What does it prove if Jesus rose from the dead?" And
Same question.
Ross said he was sort of startled and thought, I don't know that I've ever thought about it in those terms, like
Yeah.
that it necessarily proves something. Like, so he said he kind of noodled on that for a while, and
Right.
I was really struck by that too. And I think what I would say is by raising Jesus from the dead, God the Father put his stamp of approval on this life,
Mm,
and said, this is my message to the world. Like what
mhm,
Jesus did, what he said, how he lived. I mean, think about the character of Jesus. He was someone who would touch people that no one else wanted to touch because they were
mhm,
viewed as too sick or too beyond the pale or whatever.
mhm,
Jesus is someone who said, it doesn't matter what your track record is, you can have forgiveness, you can have full restoration of your life, you can be mended, you can be made whole. So by raising Jesus from the dead, it's as if God the Father said yes to all of that. Like
uh-huh.
this is who I am for the world.
Mm,
This is what it means to know and love God, is to know that you are loved
mm,
and to know that you are forgiven. And so I really do think it keeps us from thinking of Jesus as just a good moral teacher. Obviously, he was that, and he had things to say that people of no faith or people of other faiths can learn from and fit into their own framework. That's not bad necessarily.
mm,
Um, but I think the resurrection says to us he's more than that,
mhm,
more than just a good teacher,
mhm,
more than just a moral example. He is God's message. He's God's self revelation to the world.
mhm,
Like
mhm.
I think that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I feel like even one more half sentence would be that death didn't
Exactly.
contain. Death
Exactly.
didn't win. And I think with you're talking about your Easter baskets and your mom and the chocolate and the year when we put all of the Easter eggs in the backyard and raccoons ate absolutely
Oh
every
no.
bit of it before we woke up. Uh,
Oh no.
for sure, they won. That transition for me over years has looked more um, hungrily
Mm,
at the defeat of death. When I was
yes.
a child, I didn't really need to know that yet. Thanks be to God. I mean, many
Right.
do,
Yet
but
many do. Yes. Yeah.
yes, but my experience, man, I mean, I am desperate
Yes.
for God to say, the reason death feels so nuts to you is because you weren't made for it. And
Amen.
this is not it. This
Exactly.
isn't it.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I think the
Well,
resurrection is
exactly.
personally important to me in a way than it wasn't maybe 15, 20 years ago.
That's beautiful. And one of the themes that I really explore in the book is how the New Testament talks about Jesus' resurrection as a kind of forerunner of ours. It's like
Yes.
pioneered the way.
Yes.
It's not just one little magic trick that affects this one guy 2000 years
Right.
ago. It's the fact that he defeated death means that we will also overcome death. Like we will
Amen.
also be raised. And so yeah, I love that.
Yep. Oh, me too. May it happen soon.
Mm,
You mentioned mending. I
mm,
love the word mending. I'm
mm.
really into it. I don't know actually how to mend my own clothes, but the
Uh,
spiritual
yeah.
mending, you mentioned this in your book, the mending of individuals at the first Easter. And you do this beautiful job of mentioning specific people, Thomas,
Yes.
Mary at the tomb, Peter,
Yep.
Cleopas on the way to Emmaus, all
Yeah.
these individual names
Yeah.
of human
Yeah.
beings
That's right.
that Jesus intersected with and
That's
helped
right.
them kind of untangle the knots.
Yes.
That is a beautiful, fresh look at that story
Mm.
for me.
Mm.
And I wonder if
Mm.
you could talk a little bit more about that, because if we're not
Yeah.
careful, Easter is a global or
Right.
universal kind of impersonal
Right.
holiday with lilies.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
you make the very powerful argument that I think Jesus himself made, that this is a personal,
Yeah.
gritty, kind of
That's right.
earthy, intimate holiday
That's
or
right.
a
That's right.
moment in history. So talk to me about that nature of
Yeah.
Easter.
Yeah. I love talking about that. Yeah. So I also love that word mending, and I also can't mend my own clothes, sadly.
Okay, good.
But one of my friends, Francis Spuffer, wrote a book about Jesus years ago, and he said, if I had to summarize kind of the message of Jesus, his sentence is, and I quote this in the book: "Far more can be mended than you know." And
Mm,
I just love that. Far more can be mended than you know. And the re-knitting, the regathering of the fragments of our lives, into this beautiful whole. I forget, Kim, you can help me if you know the answer, but there's a particular style of Japanese sculpture where there's like,
Kintsugi.
thank you.
I don't
There's
know
like
why I
a
know that, but there you
like
go.
a break
Kintsugi.
break breaking
Hmm.
of pottery, but then a remending of it with like
Threads of
gold
gold.
filling.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's just a beautiful image
Hmm.
of what Jesus is doing. Yeah, and you're exactly right. I mean, these stories of the first Easter are so intimate.
They are.
So for example, and they're very homely. Here's Jesus on the shore of the lake with a charcoal fire, ready to make breakfast. And the person that swims ashore to him is the very person who claimed that he never knew him 3 times, Peter.
Around a charcoal
Um,
fire, you
Around a
mentioned.
charcoal fire, which is
Mhm.
exactly the same word in the original language. So it only shows up in those two places in the gospel.
Unbelievable.
It's the night before Jesus died when this girl comes up to Peter and she says, "Hey, don't I recognize you? Don't you know Jesus?" And 3 times Peter says, "No, I don't know him." And then there's another charcoal fire after his resurrection, and there's Peter again. And Jesus 3 times asks him, "Do you love me?" And it's as if
Mm,
Jesus is saying, "Those 3 times that you denied me, we're gonna remend. We're gonna redo those,
mm,
and you're gonna be restored." And I just think it's absolutely beautiful. And there's something you can convey with a story like that you can't
mhm.
convey with just straight prose. It,
100%.
it's the beauty of the scene itself that is the message.
Totally.
So,
It's not the bullet point, you are forgiven, passive
right,
verb. I
right,
mean, it's just
exactly,
so, it just
exactly,
flies off the page. So
exactly,
I
exactly.
love that. I really love your insistence in this book, and my guess is in your life, to continue to look at the individual um, story with a name. That these are
Right.
people with names. He didn't
That's right.
appear to the masses. He appeared
That's right.
to people with names.
Right.
My
That's right.
the story in the Bible that makes me cry every time I read it is when I'll cry talking about it right now. When Jesus turns to Mary and says her
I know.
name.
I
I mean,
know.
is there
Exactly.
anything more tender than
Exactly.
that? And that when he
Exactly.
says that, she knows,
She knows.
okay.
She knows in that moment. Isn't exactly.
Oh, I mean,
Exactly.
there's so many
That's
ways he could have told this story and lived
that's
this
right.
story. It just
That's
makes me
right.
love him more.
That's right. Amen.
Okay, we are talking about a very familiar biblical story. Um, and I would love your thoughts on how you, in your own life, so this is your work, Dr.
Mm,
Hill. This is what
true.
you teach about, write about, live
Yeah.
all the time. How do you approach familiar words, familiar stories, familiar, even like they become tropes in
Mm, mm,
Christianese? How
right.
do you look at those things on an individual basis and kind of, again, peel back the layers? I'm
Yes.
a word person. I get a little bit feisty about words that we overuse so much that we forget to think about their root or their meaning. So I'm curious, just reader to reader, person to person, how do you do that? How do you approach something super familiar that's been written about a bazillion times
Yes.
and look for the fresh?
That's a really good question, and another one that I've not been
Oh,
asked
I'm
before
so glad.
these interviews. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, one of the dangers of being a church-going person who loves the Bible is that it can all become rather stale. We know the words to the songs, we know what the story is going to say, and I think part of the challenge of a spiritual life is really not just allowing our eyes to glaze over, but trying to encounter it in fresh ways. So, I've mentioned several times already, I'm a big reader, and I'm always looking for writers who can help me with fresh ways of putting things
Mm-hmm.
that are just, they're not using the same tired vocabulary words. They're saying something that is old and familiar, but in a brand new way that makes me hear it in a
Mm-hmm.
in a new register, so to speak. So like
Yeah.
Francis Scufford, far more can be mended than you know.
Mm.
I mean, that is a way of saying the gospel that I haven't heard before,
Right.
and like, and I don't use the word mend. I tend to use the word redeemed or
Mm-hmm.
saved, but to use the
Mm-hmm.
word mend, oh, that makes me hear it in
Yeah.
a new way, and maybe with a new kind of set of images in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
God taking some knitting needles
Stitching it back. Yeah.
and stitching it back together. So I'm always on the lookout for people who can do that.
Mm.
Um, we didn't talk about this ahead of time. I didn't plant this question for you, but I have on my nightstand right now a book called Amazing Grace
Mm.
by a writer named Kathleen Norris.
Okay.
So she's a very interesting writer, but the book is just, I think the subtitle is A Vocabulary of Faith.
Mm.
And it's just her. Each chapter is very short, so I can read one before I turn out the light and go to bed. But she'll take an old, dusty church word and she'll try to breathe new life into it,
I love
just clean
that.
it up. And so, yeah, I try to pay attention to people who are doing that and
Mm.
learn from them. And I do think one of the things I enjoy about having to preach is kind of asking myself to do that on behalf of
Mm-hmm.
the people who will be listening to me.
Yes.
How can I come at this story from a maybe slightly different angle
Yeah.
with a slightly different set of questions? How can I mine the story for
Mm-hmm.
new depths
Mm-hmm.
there? So yeah, yeah,
I love
um,
that. I mean, our comfort is that scripture is so unbelievably layered and
right,
rich. You
right.
don't come to a time in your life where you're like, well, I got that
That's right.
nailed.
That's right.
So
That's right.
we
Exactly.
there's plenty to mine. I think the danger
Yes.
is just deciding we don't mine anymore. That would be
Exactly.
a bad decision.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, I have a church calendar question for you.
Yeah.
Never in my whole ding dong life did I know that I knew Lent. But I did not grow up in a liturgical calendar church.
Same.
So I'm still, even in adulthood, kind of new to this. And so I know about the practice or the rhythm of, or observance rather, of Lent, of 40
Right.
days of Lent. But Eastertide is 50 days.
Right. That's right. That's right. Yep.
Now, what about that? First of all, that is a really great full stop sentence.
Yeah.
Just in the
Yeah.
balance of things,
Right.
Lent is 40, the celebration is 50.
Exactly.
I've never
Exactly.
even heard anyone talk about that. I always thought Easter's done
Mhm.
on Easter Sunday,
Yeah.
so correct
Same.
us.
Same, exactly. Yeah, so it's been interesting. So we were talking before we started recording. I went to an evangelical Christian college called Wheaton,
Mhm.
and when I went there, a lot of students were discovering like Lent and the
Yeah,
church calendar, and it was all new to me. It was not
totally.
nothing we had done in my church growing up,
Mhm.
and I learned. So people will give up something for Lent,
Right.
like
That's what
maybe
I knew growing up.
give up
It's the not
chocolate, give
fun
up
time.
coffee. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And you sort of think, oh, it's this prolonged season when, it's still very rainy outside and muddy, and the
Dour.
flowers aren't necessarily blooming yet, and all this kind of,
Totally.
we're waiting for the nicer weather. But, and I quote N.T. Wright, who's an Anglican writer and bishop. He says, if that's all you know of the church calendar, you have a really skewed understanding, because the church says, yes, that time of Lent is important, that time of letting go of things that clutter our lives, trying to foster attitudes and habits of repentance. All of that is
Mhm.
important. But even more important is the even longer celebration of Easter, when it's not that we're giving up something, it's that we're trying to enter more deeply into the sheer joy and triumph
Joy.
of the resurrection. So, and there were all these practices that early Christians had. I mean, certainly they had their Lenten fasting practices, but when it came time for Easter, there was food, there were parties, there were special ministries of taking food to the poor. Just trying to underscore the lavish generosity of God. God has done something totally beyond our comprehension. He's raised a dead person from the dead. Let's pull out all the stops and celebrate this. This is
I love it.
powerful hope. So that's
I love it. I think it's the party time. And for some reason, all that stuck was the repentance time. And the underscoring of the beauty that can come from repentance and self-examination and the letting go.
Right.
I'm in. I'm totally in.
Right.
But I didn't know we're supposed to party. I thought we just had a ham and then we went back to normal.
Well, I also wonder, and I don't really explore this in the book. This is just a thought off the top of my head. But I think if you had asked me when I was a kid, are there different seasons to the year? I would have said absolutely. But for me, they were the marketing seasons. Like you go into the market and you see there's the Halloween season. Then there's Christmas season, which starts about mid-October or earlier, and then there's, St. Patrick's Day and Valentine's Day.
You had retail calendar.
Yeah, retail calendar.
Totally.
And in retail, all the Easter stuff goes off the shelf the
Gonzo.
day, Monday afterwards.
And it's July 4.
And I think exactly. I mean, almost literally, probably. Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe part of our discipleship, if we do want to try to reclaim some of this Christian calendar, is just saying it's not the same as the retail calendar, and we need to resist the idea that this is just about buying a bunch of chocolate and then taking down all the decorations the next day.
Bring it.
This is about real solid hope. The overcoming of death, and let's keep eating the chocolate for a long time beyond Easter Sunday.
I'm so here for that. I love that. I really think that's going to shift the way I walk into stores. Honestly, I mean, I've definitely pushed back in my heart about that for Advent and Christmas, but I'm now Easter. We're adding it in.
Great.
One last question for you. Well, I have two, but one's a freebie. This one, I'm wondering about your counsel, again, as a scholar. This is your field. I keep hearing this kind of rumble about our lack, as American Christians in particular, a lack of biblical literacy. That's a kind of a phrase that I keep hearing bandied about. And a lament that most people don't really know their Bibles, that we kind of pick and choose, cherry pick, put something on a pillow and move on. Maybe that's my own interpretation of it. But there's obviously a grave risk of a lack of kind of treating Scripture with care.
Yes.
Just talk to me for the average Joe or Jane. How does one increase their biblical literacy? And I'm talking about somebody who has a 40, 50 an hour a week job, and they're not in a master's program, and they're not getting an MDiv. Like, what does that look like on a daily intake for the normal person?
So I have two really concrete things that come to mind immediately.
Fantastic.
And one of them comes out of my tradition. So I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church, which is kind of it's part of the worldwide Anglican communion. And we have something that's called morning prayer and evening prayer. It's just a very brief service where you're getting into the Psalms, a little bit of the Old Testament, a little bit of the New Testament, and then you're
gospel.
You're praying. You're offering words to God. And the cool thing about this is that there is a podcast that you can listen to. It's called A Morning at the Office. And the reason it's called that is because the daily office is that rhythm of morning and evening prayer. That's the technical phrase for it.
Not Steve Carell, different office.
Exactly.
Good clarifying point.
I have talked to so many people who say, I don't know how I'm going to have time to pray, but here I am ferrying kids to this or that sports practice. Here I am waiting in line at the grocery store. You can just pop in your earbuds and pray with that podcast. The other thing is I have complicated feelings about the ESV translation of the Bible, but they have a lot of amazing resources. One of which is a beautifully read. They've produced an audio version of the entire ESV Bible translation. You can get it for free if you download the ESV app. And I have started just listening to that. And the nice thing about it is you're not just like the verse stitched on the pillow, the one individual verse. You're hearing, chapters at a time.
Right.
You can do it while you're grocery shopping or whatever. And it's so I just think things like that make it easier to get ourselves into the Bible and encountering the Bible as a grand story, not just as a set of isolated pearls on a string or something like this. So those are just two very concrete suggestions.
Great suggestions
for how to go forward.
Great suggestions. And to your point, when we hear it in bulk, I've many times in my adult life thought, oh, I didn't know that came before and after.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
You hear the whole kit and caboodle. I have one addition to that. In addition to the ESV audio, on the YouVersion app, the NIV UK version, this is going to show you how much of a nerdy pants public television person I am.
I love it.
Do you remember? You probably don't remember. You're younger than I am, but there was a Poirot is an Agatha Christie character.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the man who played that.
Kenneth Branagh.
Yes. Before Kenneth, there was a French actor. No, he is British actor. And I'm blanking on his name, David.
I know, I am too. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
He reads he's a devout person in his real life.
Okay.
He reads the entire NIV UK version. And I'm just going to tell you, if he wants to read Psalm 63 to me, I will listen to him.
I am very glad to know about this. So this is YouVersion. Is that?
It's on the YouVersion app. Yep. And you can choose whatever version, but it's NIV UK, thanks to my best friend, Betsy Beach up in Minnesota, who told me about this. I don't know why just having Poirot read it to me makes
I am very glad to hear about this. I'm going to download that right after we hang out.
Do it. You'll love it for sure.
Yes.
Okay. Before I let you go, I would love to ask, you've already mentioned so many great books, so really this feels like I'm greedy, but I ask all of my guests books that they recommend over and over, a book on their shelf right now that they're stoked about. This could have nothing to do with what we've discussed. It can be your favorite novelist. But hit me. What's one that you return to over and over?
Well, so I'm just going to shoot from the hip here. This is brand new. So one of my ways of staying sane is I love to cook, and I think part of the reason I do that is because so much of my life is looking at screens and working with words. I just enjoy chopping an onion and
beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah. So I just got a hold of the revised Betty Crocker cookbook, which is both very nostalgic for me because my mother had that cookbook. You may remember there's like a
red and white checkerboard,
red and white check gingham print on that, but they've totally revised it and made it a whole lot healthier and a whole lot more like it relies a lot less on like the condensed
cream of mushroom soup.
And it's like beautiful. There's tons of pictures. And
You're kidding me.
I highly recommend it. It's really good.
Okay, so the print version of the newly revised
the new
BC.
Betty Crocker cookbook. Yep.
That's a hoot. I'm listening to another BC, Barefoot Contessa Ina Garten's memoir right now.
I want to read that.
It's so fun. It's fun to hear her. I'm doing the audio version, and she has, it's just like having her in your kitchen with you all the time. So very interesting.
That's great.
But I bet she owes something to the Betty Crocker cookbook too. We all stand on the shoulders of the gingham.
Exactly.
Dr. Hill, at the very end of your acknowledgments, I read the acknowledgments. You have this beautiful dedication to your nephew, and that's how I would love for us to end today. I know it's a benediction to him, but I think it's for all of us, and it's so beautifully written. You say, "May you always know the truth and hope of the Easter good news, the love who lives for you with death behind him." You have written so beautifully about this pivotal, joy-drenched moment for us every year and also in the history of the Christian church. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to do it because you have enriched my Easter season. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on the show. It's wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you.